Okay, everyone, hello and welcome to the last session of the second day of the Year of the Man Summit. It is the afternoon for most of us, the middle of the night for some of us, and the tomorrow morning for our speaker, Jasper Brown. Jasper, I actually found on Instagram, and like I was saying before we started recording, he is the essence. He's the moment. He is the guy that you go to for this type of coaching. Like I said, I didn't know how to describe it besides that, because when he speaks, you can feel an energetic shift within you. He's very calm, he's very collected, and he has truly adopted the practice that he preaches. So he's a men's coach who specializes in relationships and communication and intimacy. And so he helps men solve their most sensitive problems in their high stakes relationships so they can live an epic life. Jasper himself has gone through so many highs and lows in his own relationship and has come out the other side to something super beautiful, super ethereal. He does work with his partner, and I just can't wait to have him speak. So he's here today to help you guys live your most epic life. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jasper, which is also 6 a.m. in the morning for him because he's in Tasmania. So thank you so much for being awake with us on Sunday morning for you. And yeah, take it away, Jasper.
Thanks, Elise, and I'm very honored and very grateful to be able to show up here and be with you guys, despite it being so early for me. It was a bit of an edge. It's always a little bit nerve-wracking to turn up to a group of complete strangers and start presenting. But it's something which it also excites me because I'm very passionate about this work, and I continually see the positive fruits that come from sharing my story and my partner and my eyes work with men and the impact that this has on their relationships. So it's just an absolute joy and a pleasure for me to turn up here and be able to share this with you guys. I'm going to present some slides for you guys and take you through a bit of a journey into my perspective on authentic masculinity in relationships. Now, why did we pick this topic? Elise and I were brainstorming at the beginning, deciding what to talk about, what would fit well with the Summit of the Man. And I came up with this idea of authentic masculinity in relationships because I think so many men struggle with actually understanding what it is to be a man in the world today. And how do we translate that struggle into our most intimate partnerships, where it matters most, where we have the highest stakes. And so we settled on this idea, and I've put together a bit of a story and a progression of tools and resources which I've found particularly useful for me in my own relationship and with the work that I've done with now it's thousands and thousands of men. So what I want to cover today is what I call the masculinity crisis, the struggles that we as men face in the world today, how that shows up, why that shows up, and what we're going to start doing about it. I want to go into how we can start transcending the traditional stereotypes of masculinity, what I call the attachment/self-expression dilemma that we pick up as children and that permeates our entire lives and our relationships. I want to tell you a little bit more about my story, my journey through, the struggles that I've encountered in figuring out what it means to be a man in this time, and how that really, really rocked me at many moments in my relationships, caused me to have toxic relationships, and how I managed to turn it all around when my relationship was on the brink of collapse after broken trust and infidelity and all of the crazy shit that we managed to work through. And lastly, I want to finish by giving you guys some tools, some resources and things that I've particularly found useful, that I pass on to other men, and that simple action steps that you can take today to really make some progress in this direction. So first up, I want to dive into what I call the masculinity crisis. And chances are, if you're on this call, you'll have some idea, and hopefully you can relate to what I describe. Now, when we look around us into the world, we see men are struggling to understand what it means to be a man, struggling to understand how to show up. There seems to be this kind of conflict and war between the sexes, and this imbalance in the kind of masculine, feminine identity, and Yeah, there's been this big rift somehow since polarity in the world has shifted. Once feminism sort of came to the fore, women have stepped much more into their masculine and somehow reclaimed their power, their sovereignty, started to make much more money and free themselves, which has been 100% necessary. And at the same time, this shift, we can see that it's gone in many ways a bit too far. And a lot of us men have found our place in the world being questioned, um, finding it very, very difficult, finding ourselves in relationships with women who are very much in their masculine, not knowing how to surrender, not knowing how to be feminine, holding that strong shield of hyper independence, being very critical, bossy, and at many times downright toxic. And as men receiving that, it's extremely difficult. We're kind of left without the tools, without the understanding, like what do I do with this? What do I do with women these days? It's very, very difficult, and that creates a lot of problems for us. And in terms of polarity, we see that shift moving in the other direction for us. Men are being called at this time to integrate our feelings, to embrace our sensitive side, to develop more emotional intelligence. And there's a lot of resistance towards that. On the one hand, we need it because we're all wounded, we've all struggled. We all have that little boy inside of us who never got the love, care, and affection that he always needed. And at the same time, that conflicts with a lot of the messaging that we received around being a man. We're told to be strong, we're told to be confident, told to be taking charge of the situation. How do we balance that with the sensitive side of ourselves? And we'll be looking at that today. I think a lot of this comes from the absence of having healthy masculine role models in our lives. Speaking from my own perspective, I had a good father, but my parents split up and I saw him cheating on my mother, displaying a kind of masculinity, which personally, I didn't want to live. I didn't want to grow up to be like my dad. And I think so many men can relate to that. And this sort of ties in with another feature, which is the lack of initiation into manhood in our culture, particularly in the West. We no longer have these rites of passage that really forge us into kind of men of integrity and show us how to step forward into life with a balanced character. And since that's missing, where do we look instead? We're left searching online. We're left getting mentorship from whoever we have around us, and that might not be the best. As I said, we get a lot of mixed messages about what it means to be a man, and that leaves us struggling to show up with confidence, free to be ourselves, and how to actually be authentic in our lives and in our relationships. So that's the kind of broad strokes of the crisis as I see it. And if we want to understand this a little bit deeper, we need to go way back. If you're a fan of Elise's work, if you're interested in men's health in general, I'm sure you're aware at this stage of the way our childhood is carried throughout our lives and the patterns that we create when we're young play out in our relationships later on. And one of those is obviously the way we relate to attachment in general. And this was actually a really, really important piece for me to understand that there is this dilemma as a child between our need for attachment to our caregivers. We need to make sure we secure our attachment to our primary caregivers, otherwise we're going to die. And that at many, many moments comes at the cost of one of our other most important needs as a being, which is the capacity for self-expression, expressing our emotions. And so in order to maintain our attachment to our parents, we play the good boy. We listen to mum, we do what dad says. And at many times we needed to sacrifice what we felt in that moment. We had to suppress our tears, hide our pain, bottle up our anger in order to make sure that our parents actually took care of us. And so we've been basically conditioned to suppress what we feel. We also got punished for having negative emotions, not just by our parents, but throughout school. We got teased, shamed, and bullied for being soft or sensitive. We were never taught how to develop emotional intelligence in a healthy way. And as a result of that, we developed various coping mechanisms. This ties into our attachment style as being more anxious, more avoidant. We can develop things like nice guy syndrome, people-pleasing tendencies, or an emotional avoidance in order to put on a false front and be strong in a world that was threatening to us. So this really hit home for me because I realized that this was at the core of why I was struggling so much when my partner would get upset, when she would raise her voice, when she would slam the door, because that triggered in me this attachment wound, this fear of being abandoned, this fear of actually showing up and maybe speaking my mind or displeasing her, because that would trigger this deep wound of mine, which was the fear of rejection and abandonment from my mother, for example. So once I understood that, that started clicking some light bulbs in my head, and I really started to work with this and understand that the problems in my intimate relationships as a man were a direct result of these patterns that had been installed in me as a boy. And that sort of opened up many doors, and I hope it will for you guys too, and perhaps it already has. As a result of this, we learn to hide behind a facade. We slowly learn to show only the parts of ourselves that our parents, that our peers, and women expected to see. This is how we wind up as the happy, confident, nice guy version, or the strong, confident, alpha, tough, stoic, masculine side. Either ends of those spectrums, in my view, are unhealthy. They come at the cost of our authenticity, of really being able to speak our mind, be free with who we are, and express ourselves in a very authentic manner. And ultimately, that's not what we want. We don't want to have to hide from the world. We don't want to have to put on a false front. We want to be able to show up as ourselves, right? I know I certainly do. That's when I feel the best. That's when I feel most relaxed and most comfortable in my skin. And yet I had all of these patterns which were basically keeping me locked in this box of a person who I thought I had to be. We have the modern masculinity mentors out there who are promoting this stoic alpha approach, playing on the wounds that we have as a boy because we got all of this conditioning to don't be a pussy, men don't cry, don't be a wimp, you got to man up. And in the face of that, their approach is to cultivate this outward strength and confidence, making tons of money, having lots of bitches, being very stoic, never showing fear or emotion. And in my view, that's covering up layers and layers of unmet needs, deep trauma, and decades of emotional repression. And don't worry, I went far in this direction. I used to be obsessed with the red pill. I thought that was the answer until I got to a point where I realized that it's not authentic to me. It didn't feel real. It was just another false front, just a more apparently stronger one. And at a certain point, I realized that that was actually extremely damaging for my relationship and almost caused me to lose the love of my life. So obviously this approach, if we follow that path, it leads us down a dark road, which can negatively, very negatively, I would say, impact our mental health. When our mental health is suffering, obviously, so do our relationships. This kind of approach, this rejection of who we truly are, is always going to lead to an unhealthy and dysfunctional relationship with ourselves, first and foremost, because we cannot show up and admit the truth. We cannot express ourselves as we would wish, and we end up avoiding and rejecting certain parts of us and suppressing and pushing away and numbing out to who we truly are. And that's not healthy, is it? It also leads to very dysfunctional relationships with others, especially our most intimate partnerships or our kids, because we always then have to hold up this view of being the nice guy or the alpha, which means that we can never actually show the side of us that's in pain, that feels shame, that is struggling and with the burden of grief or sadness or fear and bottling up our anger over time, which only leads to toxic masculinity exploding out into the world later down the line. It also leads to sexual dysfunction. Emotional dysregulation is at the core of premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, performance anxiety, and this was where I started, you know. The whole reason I got into men's work because I had no idea how to control the sexual energy. I would come way too soon. I would go flaccid and couldn't get it up. And this was obviously a major point of pain in my relationship because I didn't feel like I was a man. And when I started to work through that, the core of that was always emotional avoidance. I was running away from what I was feeling. I didn't know how to work through my emotions in a healthy way. And women can obviously sense this avoidance, and it's a major turnoff. It doesn't make them feel safe. They can tell that you're rejecting part of yourself and struggling to connect to yourself in a deeper way. And obviously that puts them in a position where they're like, if he can't handle his own emotions, how on earth is he going to handle mine? And that costs us, you know, we don't want to be there. The cost is deep emotional intimacy because you cannot have the deepest levels of intimacy and connection with someone without creating that safety, without creating a deep vulnerability and revealing of who you are. Because that's what's necessary. We need to be able to find someone with whom we can open ourselves completely to. And so many men have a massive resistance to that. And I know I certainly did. So I hope I'm resonating with you guys. That leads me to where we'd rather be. I think I can speak for most men here when I say I would rather be in a position where I feel empowered, confident, and free to show up as myself. We want to be able to enjoy healthy, vibrant, and deep love relationships because that's one of the best parts of life. We want to be able to integrate our shadows, our wounds, and turn our vulnerabilities into strength by going into the depths and healing what needs to be healed and emerging from that like a phoenix rising from the ashes, who is then courageous enough to live life aligned with his values and aligned with the truth. That's what it means to be a man of integrity. And that, I think, is the path for a good life, for a great life, because then you're healthy in your relationships. You have a deep sense of connection to who you are as a man. And this empowers you to go out there into the world and do what is most meaningful to you. When we don't have those things, obviously we spiral into depression. Our lives are mediocre. Our relationships are toxic, and that's not where we'd want to be. So then the question becomes, how do we get there? How do we make this transition? And my view is through authentic masculinity. So authentic masculinity is a concept that transcends traditional stereotypes and societal expectations of what it means to be masculine. What was in the past, the answer is no longer the answer today. We live in a different world. Times are changing. Women are changing. Relationships need to evolve, and so do we. There is too much wounding in this world and too much unhealed trauma for us to continue in the same way that we have in the past. Because all we're doing is dragging that train of trauma behind us that has been existing for generations and generations, passed on from father to son and the next son down the line. We need to break that cycle at some point, and that starts now. So this is about being true to oneself and embracing both strengths and vulnerabilities and engaging with the world from a place of integrity and genuine self-expression. Having the balls to show up as yourself and be the man that you are, and having the tools at your disposal to make sure that that functions in a healthy way, that leads you in the direction of building the life and the relationship that you long for. So some common objections, let's deal with these because they often come up when I talk about this stuff. So a lot of guys have this fear that they'll be less attractive to women if they express their sensitive side. She'll use my feelings against me as ammunition down the line, and I'll get manipulated or taken advantage of in various ways. Other guys won't respect me. They'll think I'm weak. If I speak my truth, people will reject me. And all of those things are true to a certain extent. But you have to, and the caveat with that is if you're with the wrong person, if you're with the wrong woman. Because if this is happening to you, you have to ask yourself the fundamental question, is that the kind of relationship I'm looking for? Will I tolerate the person that I love and devote myself to reacting to seeing my sensitive side or me embracing these wounded parts of me in this way? For me, it's a hell no. It's a no fucking way am I going to tolerate someone in my life who's going to use my vulnerabilities against me as ammunition. If that shit starts to go down, we always have a choice. That's when you have to bring in a boundary. That's when you have to draw the line. If people reject you because you've spoken your truth, good. Those are not people that you want around you. Clearly, they don't resonate with your truth. Clearly, they shouldn't have a place in your life. Other men won't respect me. I don't know about that. I have never seen a man reveal the truth of his heart and break down in sobbing sorrow because of the emotional pain that he's been going through. And I've looked at that man and said, I don't respect that guy. It's the opposite. For me, if I see a man that has the courage and the strength to admit his truth, even if it's deeply vulnerable and deeply painful, man, that cracks me open. I respect that man a million times more for the guy that, compared to the guy that would never admit or show his tears to anyone. So I think it's time we need to flip the switch and relate to this in a different way and see that these vulnerabilities that we have, we can turn those into strength. And they are something that actually is super endearing, super connecting, and super creating like this, a space in the heart where we actually resonate with the other people in our lives on a much deeper level. And the last objection here is that I don't even know where to begin. And this was me. So I'll explain this in a bit more depth with a little bit more about my story. So I used to be this playboy kind of mixture between a stoic, emotionally unavailable guy and a people-pleasing nice guy. When I first met my partner, Natalie, who I do my work with now, our relationship was an absolute fucking disaster. We were fighting constantly, breaking up all the time, both of us very wounded. At the time, we were involved in a cult. So there was all of these crazy dynamics. We were polyamorous. We tried all these different things, and it was just a toxic nightmare. Eventually, we got to a certain point where we started to really commit to doing this work. We realized neither of us were getting what we wanted. We both wanted to have that amazing relationship deep down in our hearts. We knew we were right for each other. We just had to work through all of the struggles, all of our dysfunction, all of our wounding, and we decided to do that together. So then began the slow path of repair and recovery and freeing ourselves from these toxic cycles. And that really involved me having a very, very hard look in the mirror. I had to admit the truth of all the fucked up things that I did, all of the mistakes that I made, all of the times that I betrayed her, cheated on her, invalidated what she was feeling, broke her trust. And then I had to set on the path of atonement, of really working with my shadows and integrating the parts of me that, despite my best intentions, had done things that had caused her so much pain. And on this path, she, as a beautiful woman, she has given me one of the most precious gifts in my entire life, which is this curiosity and tender yearning to understand the truth of my heart. I was there pushing her away, trying to avoid expressing my truth. And she was saying, I want to see you. I want to know what you're feeling. And I was afraid to open up, but eventually she was like begging me to tell her what I was truly feeling, what was in my heart. And eventually this led me to be convinced that actually this woman wants to see this part of me, that she's longing to see that part of me. And so I then set upon the path of how do I actually express what's inside of me, and finding myself very lacking in the tools, lacking in the vocabulary. I didn't even know where to begin. So this was a huge initiation for me. And one of the things that she pointed me towards in the beginning, because she could see that this was an area of development where I was lacking somehow, that I needed some support and guidance from her. She was very generous in that. And she was always asking me, what are you feeling? And then I would sit there and I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm feeling something, but I don't know what it is. And she would be like, what are you really feeling? And then I would and then I would have to do the work. I would have to actually sit there and be like, fuck, like, what am I feeling? And then eventually I would get to the point where I would have some sort of awareness. I'd be like, I'm feeling jealous. And then she was like, that's beautiful. And I'd be like, what? I thought jealousy was a bad thing. And then she was so loving, so embracing, and so curious about that. She's like, tell me more about that. Why are you jealous? What makes you jealous? And that slowly cracked me open and started me to to basically start opening myself up. So here's a little model which I've then sort of used as a process to help you guys to start somewhere. And I'm going to give you two tools. This is the first one. So basically, this is just a little blueprint. When we feel something, how do we break free and escape this box of basically clenching around it and feeling too afraid or resistant towards opening up? First of all, we need to turn towards what we're feeling instead of avoiding, distracting ourselves and numbing ourselves out with social media, porn, video games, food, whatever your coping mechanism of choice is. We need to cut that shit out and start turning towards what we feel instead of running away from it. Because running away is not a particularly masculine attitude anyway, is it? It's much more courageous, much more masculine to actually turn towards and embrace the truth of what you feel. Wouldn't you agree? The next step, super important. We need to validate the shit out of ourselves for whatever we feel. There's no shame in whatever you're feeling. It's just the truth. You feel whatever you feel, and that emotion is existing there for a reason. Your body is sending you a message. That's what emotions are for. We are emotional beings. Emotion, it's energy in motion, moving through your body, and it's a language that we can learn to speak and learn to tap into and learn to embrace. So when that stuff moves through us, we need to validate it. We need to embrace it and open ourselves towards it and tell ourselves, it makes sense that you feel that way. Of course you feel misunderstood. Of course you feel unfairly accused. Of course you feel ashamed or sad or fucking angry. It makes sense that you do. Look at all of the shit you've been through. And what I found is when I validate what I feel, this creates like an openness. Because often the other people in our lives, they're not in a position, if we've had a conflict, they're not in a position to validate what we feel. And even if they are, they'll never truly understand what you feel because you're the only one that's feeling it. So we are the best person to actually validate whatever it is we feel when it arises. And this for me has been an incredibly healing thing. Whenever I feel upset or angry or frustrated with myself, or we have an argument in my relationship, I just come to myself and I sit with what I feel and I just give myself that love and acceptance that I'm longing for. And that opens me up, that softens me. And then I actually have the resources and the capacity of my nervous system to then turn towards my partner and say, baby, I'm here for you. What are you feeling? What do you need in this moment? The next stage is to sharpen our ability to label and articulate what we're experiencing. So when I found myself at a point where I could feel stuff, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to point towards it. I didn't know how to express it. And I'm going to give you a tool next with something that you can start with for this. Because then we need to communicate. We need to be able to stand up for our needs. We need to be able to negotiate win-win outcomes or different agreements that we have with our partners or people in our lives regarding what's coming through us, regarding our emotional experience. So this is a simple way to progress through starting from zero and turning towards what you feel, validating it, sharpening your ability to label it, and then starting to negotiate and talk about it. And this is a model which has served me very well. And next, I want to give you guys a very simple tool, which my partner Natalie directed me towards in the earlier days of our relationship, which is called the emotional wheel. When I was sitting there struggling with my emotions, not knowing what I was feeling, her attitude was like always very open, very encouraging, very curious. And then she said, why don't you go and take a look at the emotional wheel? And I'm like, yeah, that's the cringiest thing ever. I don't need no emotional wheel. I'm fine doing it by myself. And then one day I was sat there struggling, not knowing what I was feeling, not having the words to describe it, and wishing that I did because I wanted to make progress. So I opened this up and I started looking at the emotional wheel. And what I realized is that this is such a good starting point and a resource for figuring out what we're actually feeling. So I would sit here and what I do is just cast my eyes over the wheel until something jumps out at me. So in the situation with Natalie, I was feeling jealous and then I'm like, jealousy. Okay. I'm mad. It's an anger response. So why is that happening? I'm actually feeling betrayed, let down. I'm kind of humiliated. I feel disrespected by her because she's been talking to that guy, and that makes me feel threatened. I feel exposed. I'm afraid of getting rejected, and that makes me feel weak. I'm anxious about it. It's making me, I'm worried. And that would really hurt me. I would feel super embarrassed and disappointed if something were to happen and she was going to leave me for some other guy. I'm actually very fragile in this. Why? Because I love her. I'm super proud of our relationship and I feel powerful when she's beside me. And the threat of losing that makes me feel afraid. So as you can see, this was just like a map for my emotional experience to start navigating the complexity of what I felt, because it's never just one thing. We're never just angry, or sometimes we are, but it's just for a brief amount of time. And underneath that anger is fear or sadness or, something that is triggering that, an insecurity of some sort that is triggering an anger response. And then when I started to play with this and explore this wheel, I realized that there is always this contradiction and messiness in what I feel, and that's a good thing. And it made me realize how complex my emotional experience is. And there's this full spectrum that I then started to open myself up to. And at many, many moments, I came to this wheel and I actually found a word and a label for my feelings, which I had never articulated before. And it actually brought me moments of like catharsis and tears running down my face because I realized finally I had a word for feeling neglected by my mother. Finally, I had words to describe the pain that I was in and to articulate that in an eloquent way that other people could actually relate to and understand. So I brought the contents of my work with the wheel towards my relationship with Natalie and my other relationships and started to actually express myself, which led to very healing conversations, which led to her being able to empathize and understand what I was experiencing and then be there for me, which in turn enabled me to do the same for her. So she started to feel much more safe with me because I was starting to become much more emotionally aware and intelligent. She started to surrender much more. She started to be much more feminine around me. because she felt like, hey, my man actually has his shit together. He actually understands what I'm experiencing. I feel safe. I feel safe to drop my guard. I feel safe to be feminine around him because clearly he can start handling it. I can trust in that. I can trust in his capacity to hold me in my pain. And this was a fucking game changer for me. This completely turned our relationship around and allowed us to navigate extremely difficult challenges. So I suggest, if you find this interesting, if this resonates with you, if you struggle with this kind of thing and you want to make some progress, you can print the wheel out or have it on your desktop or phone and return to it in moments of uncertainty. Lean on it as a tool and start to play with it, and you'll find it has a lot of value as a place to start, and you'll grow and grow and grow from using this. And the last thing I want to say about this is, like, our emotional experience is a spectrum of consciousness. So this, beyond being an emotional aid and a thing in something that's been useful for me in my relationship, just in my own personal growth and development, my attitude towards developing myself spiritually, the wheel has been instrumental, because emotion is just different flavors of consciousness expressed through a human being. And I learned that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. It's all just experience. We label it as bad because we're afraid of it. And that there is so much wealth and nuance and complexity for us to be discovering on this side of the wheel in particular. That's the side that we typically think of as negative emotion. This is juice. This is grist for the mill that will open you up. It'll enrich and enliven your experience of life as a man. And that obviously has a huge dividends. It pays massive dividends in your relationships because people relate to you differently. They feel you differently. You feel much more balanced, much more grounded, stronger, more integrous, more integrated as a man. So this is a tool which really has helped me to reach new heights, and I hope it will for you guys as well. Some other game-changing areas of development that I just want to mention. Obviously, we have limited time here. There's a lot I could go for days about this stuff, but I just want to drop some other things which are super transformative for me. Getting clear on my needs, what I actually needed, and owning them. As a guy with people-pleasing tendencies, I rejected my needs for a long time and always put others' needs above my own. There was a powerful moment when I shifted that and said, my needs are valid. I deserve to get my needs met. And that empowered me massively. Clarifying my core values, setting standards for myself, really deciding for myself what I was willing to accept and what I wouldn't accept, what makes me happy, what doesn't make me happy. Getting clear on this stuff and journaling about this stuff has been super, super powerful for me. And this is stuff I go into in a lot more depth in the courses that I run around this stuff. It takes work, but it's worth drilling very deeply into this stuff. Conscious communication, various models for that out there, but it's something that I've continued to invest in my life that has really saved my relationship from the brink of collapse. Taking radical responsibility, so realizing no one's coming to save me, and I'm ultimately responsible for the relationship environments that I create. If things are fucking up, it's on me. If things are going great, I made it that way. And at the end of the day, I'm the one who has always got a choice to move towards and repair, or to run away and avoid. And the last thing I'll mention is making sex sacred. I think a huge core component of a man's sense of self and his masculinity is obviously his sexuality and how he relates to that. It's an area which typically we have a lot of shame around, and I certainly had boatloads of shame that I needed to work through. But that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't started working with the wheel, working through different emotional states, developing much more emotional intelligence. That enabled me to hold my sexuality with a state of reverence. And obviously that shows up. My woman relates to it very differently because I relate to it differently. And that has flavored our intimacy and taken our lovemaking to new heights and new levels, which has been very transformative. So all in all, I just want to say that authenticity opens doors. Really embracing what you feel and standing in your truth, learning to speak your mind without fear helps you develop that confidence. We become much more decisive as men. We get very clear about what we want, where we're going, who we want to be. It enables us to overcome these coping mechanisms that we've developed as children, nice guy syndrome, emotional avoidance, anxious or avoidant attachment styles, and step into a higher version of ourselves, which is free from these patterns that have enabled us to get this far, but are also limiting us from getting to the next level. We learn to say no to things that don't serve us and say yes to that which does. And we finally feel comfortable with who we are and how we're actually showing up in the world. And in my view, it's this attitude, it's this direction and approach towards ourselves which allows our masculinity to naturally emerge. Because we're men, you know, you don't have to try to be masculine. You simply are masculine. You have the masculine body, the organs, the attitude inside of you, this desire to embrace all aspects of yourself. And if we do that, if we free ourselves and show up in a more integrated way with that kind of sense of self, you're going to be masculine. And one of the most masculine capacity is the ability to hold ourselves and others in challenging moments, to create containment, to be like the banks of a river that are containing the flow of the river, the energy that's moving through. And that allows us to be much more competent and integrated as fathers, lovers, and leaders. And then the best part is that we get to define for ourselves what kind of man we want to become. We don't need to listen to anyone out there who's telling us how to be a man. We get to decide for ourselves what masculinity means. And for me, that's liberating because I don't want to live my life at the behest or the call of someone else who thinks I need to be in a certain way. I did that for 30 years. And then I broke free from that and said, fuck that. I want to decide for myself who I want to become, what kind of man I want to be, and what masculinity means to me. And I believe that's the most empowering state to be in. Because then we set our own standards. Then we're responsible for living up to those standards ourselves. And that is empowering. That's liberating. It certainly was for me. And the more I step in this direction and I see other men following and stepping in their own relationships, in their own ways and embodying this, the results are just overwhelmingly positive. This is what women want to see. This is what the world needs. We need more men who are courageously, healthily masculine, consciously masculine. And that's what I made my online course called. It's the Conscious Masculine. This is what we need. This is what I want in my own life. And I hope you guys feel inspired by this. So in terms of next steps and a bit of homework that I can set for you guys, reflect and identify areas in your life that you are sacrificing your authenticity. Start to notice where you're suppressing what you feel, numbing out, reaching for those coping mechanisms, or running away from who you truly are. Ask yourself questions like, what is the cost? How much is that costing me to keep doing these dysfunctional ways of relating to myself? What is the cost of my relationship? What is the cost of my children? Will they respect me as a man as they grow up and see who I am? Start drilling into the details here and you'll soon find a wealth of motivation to move yourself in the direction of commitment and steps forward. So then you can brainstorm plans for making small steps. I don't think radical shift is needed. It's just persistent dedication. Small steps turn into a snowballing effect of positive behavioral change over time. And what we need is new habits, new commitments, new attitudes towards ourselves, towards our emotional experience, towards life and our relationships. And this is the path that I hope will lead us to one day feeling that freedom of living a truly authentic life as a man in this world. So with that said, I hope you found value from this. I hope it inspires you and lights a fire inside of your heart. And this gives you the courage to step up, step out into the world in your relationships with a new attitude, with a new ethos somehow. So you can kind of evolve yourself through this attitude and emerge into your life and relationships with a newfound sense of vigor and commitment to authentic masculinity.
Wow. Love that, guys. Claps for Jasper. I loved every single moment of that. People in the chat are already going off, enjoyed you sharing your heart on this topic. Great stuff. And I agree completely with what you've touched on today. Thank you for your honest and truth. Great job. People are loving it. Thank you guys so much for showing up in your ability to receive this presentation, because he's talking about vulnerability, he's talking about emotions. And I love, Jasper, how you can express the need for these things in a masculine way. That's just such a beautiful gift that you have. Matthew, thank you for doing this for us. Elise, you got it. I mean, we do this summit once a year for men to be able to have this opportunity, because in order to book with Jasper, you got to pay a pretty penny, but he's doing this today for you guys for free because he wants to help out every single other speaker as well. So with that being said, we are now going to go to the private VIP link so that those who are invested in the VIP session can have their, private one-on-one coaching time with Jasper. So that is the last session for today, guys. I will see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp EST, the last day of the summit. If you are not part of VIP, but I think you should be, honestly, because there's one more day left and you want a copy of these recordings. So other than that, Jasper, I will see you in the VIP. You have the corrected link, right?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
guys. Thank you guys so much. See you there.